This is a clip from the Red Cow Arcade podcast.
Well, I've had an eventful couple of weeks.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So you ever in life, we live pretty packed schedules, right? Where, I think one of the predictors for success is like if you close out your to-do list every day, so you're never kind of bringing yesterday's shit into the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is because you don't know what the next day is going to bring. You don't know what the unknowns are yet. And like I got pummeled by unknowns, and I was trying to stay ahead of the train on a few. There's some content stuff I was trying to stay ahead of. There's a lot of work deadline type stuff. We had some house repair stuff that was going on at the same. There's like a lot going on, family shit too. When I was like, oh yeah, Monday I've got jury duty, and then I got placed on the jury, got impaneled for a week, and
was it heavy stuff? What kind of jury was it?
Yeah, well, I'll tell. Now that it's concluded, I'll tell the whole story.
Okay.
So it was my second time going to jury duty. No, let me rephrase. I've shown up for jury duty like 5 times in my life. And I've been sent home 3 times, and I've been on a jury twice.
Yeah. And my only thing was I was summoned once. I went to the courthouse. I was in like a room full of people. And then there's like, the judge is like, I don't know, bored today, doesn't want to do anything, so you guys can go home. Your jury duty is fulfilled. And I was like, sweet.
Well, I think what makes it different for me is that if I don't get called to Fall River, that tends to happen. If I do get called to Fall River, it's a superior court. It's like they built a brand new courthouse in Fall River like 10 years ago. And a lot of high-profile cases and criminal cases go there. They always have cases. It's a beautiful courthouse, and it's like if Fall River has one thing, it's a courthouse, and probably a prison too. So yeah, they've always got stuff for you to do if you show up for jury duty. So you come with like the form, and there's kind of it's really funny, like. I think so many people show up with the expectation that they're going to get sent home that everybody shows up looking real ratty. Like all the women have like big baggy shirts and giant coffees and croissants, and everybody's like ready to go home.
That just sounds like a New England woman, honestly.
Yeah. I was sitting at like a table full of like these like workers. They were having the most like NPC Republican conversation ever. It was very like nowadays they give you a trophy for anything. Yes, a trophy for everything. That went on for like a while like that. I was like, wow.
That was funny.
But one of the things that struck me was that the police that are in charge of corralling us, the white shirts, they're like super nice. They were really polite the entire time. And like if you didn't fill out the form, they didn't yell at you as if it was the DMV,
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were like, no problem, just there's a pen over here, and it's all good, and,
It's shocking with government workers, shocking.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if, like, they get so many complaints at some point, like, there's an overcorrection, So, much like last time, I've told this story on a podcast in my 2014 case. But to recap, it was a guy who had a suspended license because he hadn't paid it he hadn't paid child support. So he had a suspended license. He was high on something or other, on a prescription drug, and he killed a 75-year-old man who was crossing the street at his nursing home. Jeez. And then he jumped out of the car, moved the body off the side of the road, and then left the scene of the crime. And there was like multiple witness testimonies. And then like they followed him to his house, and they found the wrecked Cadillac, and they were like, "You're under arrest." And he was like, "Oh my God, I did it. I'm so sorry." And there was footage of him saying, "I did it." And so the judge later on was like, "Yeah, I'm glad you guys decided he was guilty because he was." And she's like, "I have no idea why this went to trial."
Well, as soon like sometimes they'll just be like, "Actually, I was not guilty. I take it back.
Yeah.
I was coerced."
I think that in that case, he was trying to evade. There was one charge that was like left the scene of a crime to evade prosecution. And he was like, no, I left because my girlfriend was suicidal right in that moment, and I was rushing home to save another life. That was actually the defense.
No, sorry, dude.
They were like, prove me wrong.
Just happened to be on that day.
So the reason I'm having a tough time is because I'm actually just getting over COVID. That'll be another story.
Literally, this is COVID podcast.
Yeah, COVID-19 pod.
Not me, Frankie. Remember, like last year and before, there was like a real, like, if you got COVID, it was like a sin. So it was just like you had to like apologize for it. You'd be like, oh yeah, I got I sorry, I like didn't wash my hands when I got somebody's drink. I'm sorry. Like I am. It was like, totally.
I don't know. I definitely didn't live my life. I promise I didn't live my life.
Yeah. So, but now like everybody's getting it again. So like they have to like drop that thing.
Yeah, the cases are way up. I called my doctor. I'll tell the story in a minute, but I called my doctor and she was like, any idea where you might have gotten it? And I was like, I don't know. I had jury duty.
There you go.
She was like, did you have a She was like, did you have a mask on the entire like week of the trial? I was like, no, I didn't. And she's like, well, just because it's not against the law, it doesn't, you really, she said, if you're indoors and you're around people, you should have a mask. And I was like, forever? Like, until when? I thought we were now in the epidemic phase of this. I mean, like, just when do you call it a day?
I was sharing a dunks with my fellow juror. Come on.
I was taking nibbles of a stranger's croissant. Sweaty dunks.
Sweaty dunks.
So yeah, on that trial, I was an alternate. So what that means is they choose 14 people, and they tell 2 of them to not deliberate in the end, and you don't find out until the very end. And then they're like, oh, and then like this whole week was really a waste for you because you're just on standby in case somebody else can't make it. So it was the same basic thing. So they make you watch a video. They always make the same joke. They're like, no, this is not a Leonardo DiCaprio Oscars film, but it does give some very helpful information about the juror process. And they play it. And they're like, it's very important to be a juror. And then they put on, like, last time, 8 years ago, it was Seinfeld. This time it was Bruce Almighty. Now, I was doing work on my laptop the whole time, but I was listening to Bruce Almighty. That's a movie I've not paid much attention to, in a long time. But I remember, like, on like at least 2 or 3 occasions, the cop made a joke about. He's like, we really like 2007 comedies around here, or so. And then there was another joke he made like that too, where he was like, very 2007 reference. Kept making like 2007 anyway. But I was like listening to it, and it sounded like a fake trailer. Like it sounded like a parody trailer. Like Bruce, at some point, was like, "Why God? Why me?" or something. And then he like got the power, and it was like, "I've got the power."
Yeah.
I was like, "Wow, this is like
it was a different time, man."
This is a fake movie. Yeah, 2007. Very funny time. Yeah, so they play all that. We end up in the courtroom, and that's what's funny is like you go from this kind of really informal state to suddenly like all rise,
Yeah.
and you're like in front of a judge, and there's a cop, and there's always this kind of ritualistic like in front of the Honorable Justice Dupuis, God save the Commonwealth. There's like this this kind of religious rhetoric involved.
But it's a state, so it's weird.
But everybody's got their dunks and stuff. They're like, leave your dunks behind.
In their jeggings.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're like, and then they tell the accused, they're like, please face all these potential jurors. There's a guy, So they were like, Mr. has been accused of showing his penis to a 13-year-old girl. He's a family friend. And he was, so his charges are assault of a minor under 16, enticed a minor under 14 to get in a car or something. Then there was another one. I think. Like indecent exposure, and then there was perjury, and we didn't really know much about the perjury charge, but we would learn about it more later. So they corral us for a bit, and this is a funny thing. While they were calling each juror up to talk to them, and this did not happen to me last time I was on jury duty. Last time I was, they just like almost like a round robin. They put people in the jurors box and just said like they would challenge people out, and if you didn't get challenged out, you stayed. But they didn't talk to us last time. This time they talked to each and every one of us.
Oh, really?
And like they actually put us like on the stand, and like we had to talk to the lawyers, talk to the judge while we were waiting to be on the stand. The bailiff was talking us through, I don't know, like etiquette and stuff. And they were like, this was the second time somebody said this. The cops in the first room said the same thing. They go, regarding a dress code if you're picked on the jury. Men, you want to wear a sports coat? Looks good. You want to wear a tie? Looks cute. Wear slacks? Wear a short sleeve or a long sleeve t-shirt with a collar. Ladies, I'm not going to tell you how to dress. I don't tell my mother how to dress. And I was like, that's weird.
Yeah,
Like, they were like really oddly specific with the men, and then they were like, and we won't tell women how to dress.
Men, dress nice. Women, I can't. I can't tell you. Like legally, I just don't want to get in trouble.
Bring all the croissants you'd like.
Yeah.
There was we later got a one sheet, and it was like, there are several times in life where dressing up makes sense. Being on a jury trial is one of those times. Something like that. Yeah, they're like, Mr. Frayne, they asked me a couple questions, like, oh, you were on another trial. And it turned out it was the same judge from 8 years ago. And they were like, do you think that just because a child says something that it's true? And I was like, no. And then they said, do you, I think the prosecution said, would you be able to judge a situation impartially, even in the absence of scientific evidence? I had to think about it for a second, where I was like, well, there's other kinds of evidence besides scientific, and I would judge it impartially. I guess I would have to see it. And then the other one was like, would you hold it against somebody if they didn't testify on their own behalf, like for a defense? I was like, no. And then I left for 10 seconds. They called me back in, and they were like, you're on the jury. Come back in 2 days. I'm like, fuck. I had this stacked week of meetings, and
oh yeah,
you just had your whole, what time are you going to get home? You don't know. And there was like a work event that everybody wanted, thought for sure I would be at. And so that fucked things up. And so whatever. So I come back on Wednesday, and here's the details of the trial. It's really weird, EJ, because you're not told the story of what happened in order. In fact, this I think would be especially interesting for people like us who are narrative focused. Like, we're interested in, paint a coherent picture for me, so I have everything. There's what you're gonna find as I tell this is there are gaping plot holes that were left out because of prejudicial stuff that we couldn't know, but then it just made it so that the story didn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the school shooting thing that happened this weekend, where the cops kept coming up with these timelines that didn't make sense. So people were just frustrated until finally they're like, okay, here's the timeline. It makes us look bad, but this is the real timeline. It's like you get frustrated if you can't hear the real story in the right order and the correct details.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like opening arguments, which were like, hey, this guy showed his penis to this girl, and she's going to testify. And then, and we don't have any physical evidence or camera evidence, so you'll have to go completely on the testimonies. And then the defense was like, you're going to hear during the trial that Mr. lied a couple of times about some things, but you'll have to determine for yourself if he did it in court or not, because that's what's a crime. And yeah. So like even in the opening arguments, they're like setting your expectations. And then the victim, who is now 18, so it's been 5 years since this
Wow.
happened to this girl. Yeah, so she was 13 in 2017, and now she's 18 in 2022. Got through COVID and everything. She's in college, and she's talking about something that happened to her in 8th grade.
That's justice is interesting. Justice is slow. The wheels of
the judge
justice.
later on came up to us and was like, "I don't know why this took so long to happen." Like the judge has, is just as critical of these things a lot of the time. But some of the chronology will make a little bit more sense. So, as the story goes, she belongs to this multi-tenant family. I don't know if I have that right. She for a period of time lived in a multi-tenant family like house with like multiple apartments. So there's like tons of people living in the same house. Not everybody knew each other super well. Her aunt is actually her dad's cousin, and but at this time, this family lived separately from her, and she had that aunt, quote unquote, had a son, and that son was like her age and more like her cousin. They went to school together, and the aunt's boyfriend is the guy that's on trial. The aunt who had been with her for 10 years or something, and he would often, he's a landscaper, and he would often pick up the son after school, especially like if it rained or if he was on his way to like a landscaping job anyway. And he never took the girl home. Or I think maybe he did like on some other occasion once or twice, but not very often. And they knew each other somewhat because they would see each other in their various apartments. And I guess like her dad owns all these like building complexes or something. So there's kind of, like weird relationship stuff. So the guy saw her and invited her into his truck because it was raining. And he said, I'll take you home. I'm going that way anyway. She accepted, she says reluctantly, because she didn't know that her cousin wasn't in the truck. She expected her cousin to be in the truck. And then she discovered he wasn't. She said it was like a bench seated like landscape, like worker's truck. There's a lunchbox between them, and he went out of his way. He didn't go the way home. He went to the water where there's no cameras and there's no businesses and there's no people. He parked, takes out his dick, starts masturbating, and I guess like grabbed for her arm to try to touch it and grabbed for her hoodie strings because she had like her hoodie like on a rainy day like tightened, and she was saying like he was trying to like undress her, and so she attacked him with her keychain. She went for the door, couldn't get it open right away, rolled down the window, unlocked it from the outside, and ran. And she called her cousin, who I guess like before the interaction, the guy had been like, have you seen the cousin? And so they had been calling him anyway. So he was kind of like almost in the middle of it before anything had happened. So she made contact with him, told him the story, was panicked, was crying. They got in touch with her mom and they got in touch with the aunt, and they all went to the police that moment. So very, very good. Like,
yeah.
No controversy about how that was handled. And so the cops testified as well. And and the defense got really into they got into a lot of detail about, did he when he went for the hoodie strings, did he touch your breasts or did he touch your chest area? They kept going on about that a lot. And she was like, and he was trying to catch her on a technicality because I guess when the police interviewed her, she said, no, he didn't touch my breasts, which already for a 13-year-old to me, it's kind of like, I don't even know what we're talking about. But they're like, isn't there a distinction between chest
trap or something?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, isn't there a distinction between chest area, which is like the upper kind of shoulder clavicular area, and breasts, and because it matters based on kind of touch or whatever. But actually, it doesn't. If you read the law, it's like, if he's masturbating and he fist bumps you, it's not cool under any circumstance.
No.
So, and she was a great witness. Like, she was really articulate, and she just like, you just bought the whole story. It was like she had every detail in good order, and and she was really mature. I guess she's a criminal studies major now in college, and she broke down, when she finally had to talk about what happened. It sounds like it was very scary obviously for a 13-year-old. And then her cousin testified, and this is something kind of interesting that I didn't know. In Massachusetts anyway, if you are in a trial about a sexual assault, only the first complainant can testify about what story you told. So the police can testify, but like if she was attacked and she told her mom and she told her cousin, of the two of them, only the first one who she complained to can testify.
Yeah, because it's like hearsay or something, right? It's like
they're trying to make it.
It becomes like it becomes gossip at that point if you have too many degrees of separation.
Yeah, they're trying to match the very first story that was told with the story that's being told in court, basically. And so his story more or less corroborated with hers. A couple of small changes here and there. And then the mom testified, but she testified, but she couldn't talk about what the daughter told her. And this is all stuff they also kind of work out with the attorneys in advance. And then at the end of the first day, they had a court transcriber or an interpreter read to us a phone conversation that took place in Spanish that was recorded. And it was between male voice 1 and female voice 1. And I think at that time it was revealed that it was the guy on trial and the aunt. But we don't know why it's recorded. We're all just sitting there going, like, why is there a phone call recorded? Especially knowing, like, in Massachusetts, like, you can't just record phone calls. Like, so like, what's the context of this? So all we have is the contents of it. And it's a phone conversation where he admits that he gave her the ride. And he also says something about, like, no, we went by the water where there's no cameras.
Why would you say that?
Yeah, exactly. So then I'm like, this is what I mean by, like, you don't get, like, they don't tell you the full story, and they actually say, they before the end of every day, they're like, don't try to form an opinion yet. Don't start trying to put the pieces together. Don't start trying to make your decision yet. You got to listen to everything. They actually tell you, they're like, put the trial out of your mind when you go to bed at night. Like, don't keep, hear everything and then start to make up your mind. Obviously. But it's, it makes sense. So then they had the police come. The police admitted, like, yeah, we weren't able to recover any camera surveillance. Yeah, we didn't, take the truck, or we didn't take their clothes. We didn't do anything really to recover physical evidence. They probably could have too. But they made no effort to. Especially with, like, if her hand was all over, like, the door handle, maybe they could have.
Yeah.
But they were saying, they were like, oh, it's not like CSI Miami, it's hard to recover these things. They didn't really give reasons for why they didn't do it. They were like, oh, a case like this, we wouldn't normally do that. And then they got into the breast chest area thing, where the police officer was like, if a victim comes forward and says that they were touched in the chest area, we take that to mean breast. If they were saying they got sexually assaulted and they touched my chest area, we'll take that to mean breast.
Yeah, or like you said, if there's a wiener out and you're touching somebody, it's
we've got all the info we need. Yeah,
it's not great.
And then the dude, I think it was at that time that the guy testified. And I'm like, now why would he be? Because, like, he, no offense, like he seemed like kind of a low IQ, low functioning guy. And I'm like, why are they putting him up there? And it all became kind of clear. There was a hearing of some kind. This is where the perjury charge comes in. There was a hearing where he was asked about what happened that day a couple months after it happened. And he said that he never gave her a ride in that hearing.
Nice.
And then there's this recorded conversation where he says, I gave her a ride. And so he's either lying here or he's lying there.
I gave her a ride to a place with no cameras.
Yeah, exactly. So they put him on the stand so that he could repeat what he said in court, whether it was a lie or true. He would stick to the thing that he said in court and say, "No, I was lying to my girlfriend, which is not a crime. I actually never gave her a ride that day at all. Period. End of story." So that was the first time we got to hear, like, oh, that's your side of the story. Is like, oh, she's making the whole fucking thing up, from my lunchbox being in the middle of us to the kind of door lock that's on my truck to this exact traffic pattern that a 13-year-old was able to describe. You know, like, it's all made up. And I thought that was weird. I was like, they're really like going out of their way. I mean, because what that did was that opened the prosecution up to being able to ask him a bunch of questions, which none of them stood up to scrutiny. And I'm like, they're really risking their case.
Yeah, because once you get crossed, that's like, you can ask anything. You know, opens up a lot of stuff. Yeah,
and he could have. He's, you know, it's innocent until proven guilty. He doesn't have to do anything. The burden of proof is on the Commonwealth. So I was like, if this is really all just to evade the perjury charge, like, why is the perjury charge so concerning? You know, as opposed to like sexual assault charges. and I will have learned this by the end. So I was lucky enough to get to be in deliberations. So this crosses into Friday. And we all get in there, and I'm like, all right, so like before we start, I wasn't the foreman or anything, but because it's my personality type, I led a lot of the conversation. But I was like, I think the first thing we should determine is, do we all agree that she was in that car? Because that'll determine like the next charges. Because you got to go through all the charges and say like, all right, does it meet the letter of the law? And I said, does anybody know what that phone conversation was? Because that's pretty important. And one of the women goes, oh yeah, they were in prison. He was in prison. I was like, oh. I was like, and they recorded it. They were like, yeah, they record everything that's, you know, in a prison call. And I was like, how did you know that? And she was like, he said, there was like at one point he said something like, they're recording everything we're saying or something. Oh. And I was like, oh. I said, were we supposed to know that he was in prison? She was like, I don't think so. And I later found out, yeah, you're not only are you supposed to not know that he was in prison, but so the recording is admissible for evidence, but you're not supposed to know how you got it because you're not supposed to know his priors.
Right.
And it turned out that he was a violent criminal serving a different sentence, and was on probation when he committed this crime, which meant that he had to go to a hearing right away, a probationary hearing about what happened here, where he lied. I
see. Well, that's... Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it is confusing because...
Yeah. And we didn't know any of that. Like, during delivery, we had to piece that together, basically. And we couldn't piece most of that together. We learned that later. The judge later was like, oh, yeah, here's what really happened, after we delivered the verdict. But yeah, so the perjury charge, it turns out, is by far the worst sentence. Because if you're that high level of a criminal at that point, when you lie in court about what you did, they slap. Yeah. I was like, what are the sentences for each of these? And she was like, well, the indecent exposure is like 2.5 years. The assault is like 10. The enticement is like 5. The perjury is 20.
Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're on probation and stuff.
So him being like, no, I never gave her a ride. And then, like, here's a phone conversation from prison that's like, I gave her a ride, and I know where all the cameras are. Jesus Christ. Nobody ever said criminals were smart, I guess.
No.
But, yeah, so we, of course, delivered a guilty on all charges verdict, which sounds obvious, but at the same time, you're like, well, there's no physical evidence. There's no...
True.
You know, there's no camera evidence. So you really are just going on people's testimonies and the credibility of those testimonies. And I think if there hadn't been a recording where he was lying, I don't know. It would have been hard.
Yeah, that would have been harder. But, you know, you got to deal with the evidence that you have.
Yeah. And
what's like the most common sense logical thing? You know, but it's tough if you don't.
And then there was the I think we argued a lot about the enticement charge, because we needed to know, like, when does enticement happen? Is it when she's outside of the vehicle, or because the law is written weirdly? Like it's kind of fascinating when you actually read law, and there's a lot of stuff that's like a behavior that would cause shock and appall to someone of the common moral code.
It's like, what's the common moral code?
Yeah,
Nowadays, especially, it's like,
and they're like,
everybody has their own idea.
The criteria for shock and appall is that it would be sudden shock, or not nerves.
Gasp and say, "Oh my, oh my!"
Yeah. Well, what's funny is like it's trying to make measurable all of these things that are not perfectly measurable.
Well, I never.
And the science of being a lawyer is trying to poke holes in all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an art and not a science, But yeah, we were like, technically, is it possible that he offered her the ride without premeditating the assault, and then once she was in the car, he decided to assault her? So could he have did we meet the threshold for enticement once she was in the car, or like how does that work? So we had to like write a letter to the judge and like get like a response back.
Yeah,
to try to figure that one out, and then. She did say, yes, she had to have been outside the car, but then we learned, we remembered, or we were going back through evidence, and we were like, oh, right. There have been lots of times where he had an opportunity to give her a ride and he didn't. And so this was like unusual for him. So it's based on everything else. It's likely that he premeditated it when he pulled up to her and offered her the ride. So away he will go. I don't know what his sentence was ultimately. They're going to sentence him in a couple of weeks, but nobody was surprised. And yeah, that was my jury duty story. It honestly, it is, I don't want to say fun, because it's, it's a wicked bummer to listen to a young lady talk about something like that happening to her.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Very emotional and stuff, but it's cool to, there's something kind of epic about like, we citizens are going to come in here and figure out what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's flawed, but that's the system, and like it's nice to do your civic duty in a way, and figure it out. It's not perfect, but hey, it's the best we got.
Yeah, there's kind of an agreement of like, we're gonna make a decision about this, and we're gonna use whatever we have or don't have to make that decision, but. And, down to like, the jury has to have a consensus. And sure enough, like of the 12 people, there were some really smart people in the room. There were some really dumb people in the room, and there were people who were super triggered by it, or who were kind of more like activists and were like, let's kill this guy and stuff.
It's like, hold on. Let's think about this for a second.
Yeah. It's kind of this cool, like, but between among the 13 strangers, and that's, I think, a feature too, is like, well, what do I care if I hold this thing up? They don't know me. I think that's the whole story. So if you ever get to be on a jury, I actually do recommend it. It's fun. I do it all the time.
I do it all the time. It's great. I love it.
They always get. I was telling everybody that I was like, this is my second time, and they kept like asking me for like, so what happens next exactly? I'm like, yeah, this is like my second job. I'm on juries all the time.
Yeah, it's always the joke where my father-in-law says this joke, and he's Eastern European. It's like, if I get called for a jury, I just say I know they're guilty just by looking at them. And he's just like a scary dude too. So it's
yeah, it's funny how like there's this purging of the jurors that they do at first, where you just raise the card if they're like, do you know anybody involved in the case? Do you know anybody on the New Bedford Police Department? Do you and you start to realize like how small of a world it is, where like out of 100 people, like how many of them are going to know these individuals? How many of them are going to be part of the police, ecosystem? But they do make it really hard to get out of it. Like, the whole, do you have like an urgent need to, would this take you away from something really important? Like, they don't want to hear about any of that shit.
Yeah, it's like, what does that mean? It's like, I have a
Yeah.
kid, I have a job, I have, whatever. It's
Like having an infant isn't really enough. For instance, they'd have to be like a pretty disabled infant, or something. It'd have to be like totally extenuating circumstances. But
yeah.
yeah, I like it. I hope I get to do it again. my mom, every time she's
10 out of 10.
Yeah, 10 out of 10. My mom's always like, she's like, all my life I've wanted to be on a jury, and I never get picked.
I can't say the same thing. I really don't like minor inconveniences. So.
Yeah. No, you hated it first. I do have to. I mean, I'm pretty like I don't want to say I'm phone addicted, but during the course of a work day, I'm pretty concerned about what's going on my phone, and there's many hours where it's like very illegal to look at your phone.
Subscribe to Red Cow Entertainment on Patreon for full episodes every other week.